to do this just personally in-house, but also our insurance requires this as well, right? That anytime you're going to have insurance for this many kids, they want to know, what are you doing to keep the kids safe? And not just what is your policy, are you going and taking the steps to train your people so that they know these things too? And so we want you to sign this just saying that you were here, that you went through the training, and that you received the policy manual, right? So I only have one policy manual. No, I'm just kidding. This is not one. So the goal is at some point to have, for every person that's approved to work with the kids, that we have a background check, and we have a signed form that says they've received the policy manual and been through the training, right? The background check is something we do one time. The training is going to be an annual thing. So just once a year, you get free pizza. That's how you got to look at it. God has blessed you with free pizza for once a year. A lot of this we wrote ourselves. Some of it we wrote. There's some standard things that the state of Florida has and different insurance companies have. So if it's really boring, I'm sure it was part of the part that they provided us. We'll just start by reading that first page. So this is our child protection policy statement. This is kind of our stance on things. It says, we acknowledge our responsibility to safeguard the welfare of each child and young person that has been entrusted to our care. That's the core of all of this, is that we have a responsibility. We're not just showing up and trying to do some work and trying to help. We have a responsibility, both legally and just morally, to do a good job with these kids, right? And so the very first thing is that we view this not just as us plugging away some time, and we're not just volunteers. We are accepting a responsibility to make sure that these kids stay safe and that we're doing it in the best way that we can. We are committed to providing a safe environment for everyone. And the child's welfare is and must always be of paramount importance. All children and youth have a right to be protected from abuse. All suspicions and allegations of abuse of any type will be taken seriously and responded to promptly. So we have a section here in a little bit about how do we handle it if there was an accusation of something, right? Which from time to time happens. The hope is that we never have to use any of these rules, but we at least need to be aware of them, right? It says we acknowledge that every child or young person who participates in our activities should be able to do so in a safe and enjoyable manner, in an environment free from abuse or neglect. We recognize this is the responsibility of every staff member and every volunteer in working with children or youth, right? So that's just basic, hey, we're going to keep these kids safe. It's our responsibility. Once they step foot on this property, we are accepting the responsibility of doing our best, everything within reason, to keep them safe, right? Roles and responsibilities. It's everyone's responsibility to care for and protect the welfare of children entrusted to our care with the roles and responsibilities outlined below, right? So this is kind of an itemized thing. Ensure that appropriate and properly trained supervision is in place for all activities involving children. So anytime we do something here and there's kids involved, it has to apply to these rules, right? And so it's not just what we do in children's church. So for example, we're doing I had somebody approach me this week about doing a homeschool co-op where they teach a Bible study and do some snacks for homeschool parents and their kids in our kids building once a week during the school time. And I said, that's fine, but they're still going to have to go by these same rules. So anything that's child related, all the way up to when somebody's 18, so Corey and the youth group apply to these same rules. They have to abide by these rules, right? We ensure that proper screening of staff and volunteers is conducted. So we do background checks on everybody. And, the way background checks work, there was some question about this even in some of our elders' meetings about how does that work. When you do a background check, they just they just report to us what's on there. We have to make they don't make a decision for you. They don't say yes or no on this person. They just bring it back to our attention, whatever's on there. And as a church and as staff, we have to make a decision. And so just so you know, my rules is if anybody, even if it's a long time ago, has a crime that involves children or sexual abuse, it's an automatic no for working with the kids. God still loves you. You can still be involved in the church, but not with the kids, right? We got to find a different spot for you to serve. And so those type of crimes are just an automatic no. You know, if you got caught driving with a suspended license 20 years ago, I would look at that differently. You know what I'm saying? So we have, it's our responsibility to make a judgment call whenever there is something. And so it's just that. It's a judgment call. Our only standard is if there's anything sexual or child related, it's an automatic no. We'll put you on the security team or something, or, baptism Sunday. That's what they said. They say, we'll put them on the baptism team. But anyways, keep them away from kids. All right. Maintain and update this program as needed. Along those same lines, there's one thing I didn't put in here, and I'm going to do it now, otherwise I'm going to forget, that has to do with kind of more modern things, and that's the use of technology, right? So here's one of our rules that is not in this manual that I probably have to do an addendum at some point, and that deals with taking pictures of these kids, right? So you are not allowed to take pictures of these kids and have pictures of them on your phone unless there is some kind of reason for that. So like if Rick and Sharon are taking pictures of kids' church so that we can put it on the website or do a social media program or something, that's different than a worker got a whole collection of little kids' photos on their phone, because that seems creepy, right? So in this modern age, you do have to be careful about that kind of stuff. So I didn't put that in here, but that is something that we do have to be careful of, that, these parents, they don't want you taking pictures of their kids and putting that stuff out there unless it has some reason to do for the church. That's often a red flag of questionable behavior, right? So that's why we don't want that going on, because if somebody is doing things wrong, that's going to be one of the first things they try and do is have a collection of these pictures. So to me, that's a red flag. We don't want any of that, so let's just not do that. Obviously, you have to take pictures from time to time. I take pictures if I'm putting them on the website, but make sure there's a reason if you're doing something like that, right? Respond appropriately to all suspicions and allegations of abuse, right? So that comes in two different ways. You can get children who come that are giving you an allegation of something that happened on property with one of our own workers. We have to deal with that. But also, and we'll read some of these laws on one of the other pages, that if they come in and they are saying that somebody's abusing them at home or something, we also have a responsibility to report that, right? And so that is the law. We'll read that, but that is the law. If you're working with kids and they come in and tell you that somebody has abused them, you have to do something with that information, right? And so that's the law. That's not a Stillwater thing. That's a state of Florida thing. All right. Collect and maintain proper documentation for all employees and volunteers, as well as consent forms. That's what we do here in the office. We have a file of all this stuff, so that, if anything did happen, which we're believing it won't, as a church, we need to be able to show that we did everything within reason to train and to screen people, and we have records for all of that. So we keep all of these things. And if there ever was any accusations of anything, we have to have that documented, because you never know. So anyways, that's more on our end. Train staff and volunteers in the application of this program, which is what we're doing now. And we're filming this so that if we have new volunteers along the way, we don't have to redo this every time. And so what we're going to do is we're going to somehow put it online or something so that somebody can watch it. And then I'm going to have a short questionnaire of the basics that we covered, and they have to, make sure they answer, make sure they actually watched it, Make every effort to prevent behaviors or situations that could be harmful to a child. And so that's the core of our rules that deal with always having two adults present at every time. That's the single biggest thing that we can do to prevent problems, is having two adults that have been screened present at every time. And sometimes that has not 100% been going on, so we got to make sure that we kind of restart. So whatever has happened up until this point, this is a fresh start. We're all aware of these rules, that we're not supposed to have one adult and one child. That is for two things. Number one, that's the single biggest thing we can do to protect the kids, because almost all abuse happens when it's just the one adult doing it. Because they can hide it and nobody knows. The other thing it does is it protects you as a worker from any allegations. So if a kid comes and says, oh, you did this to me, you got to have that other adult there that can say, no, I was there the whole time. They did not do that, right? And so it protects everybody. All right. So definitions of child abuse. This is required by our insurance. A child is any person who's not 18 yet. Child abuse or neglect is any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent, guardian, or caretaker which presents an imminent risk of or results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation. So it's not just beating them or being mean. There could be some other things, like if they're not getting fed and stuff like that. So it's not just the typical abuse. There's also stuff if the kids look like they're not being taken care of. And so we have one page on here that's signs to look for. If you're, 90% of the time, this is not going to matter, maybe even more than that. But on the rare occasion, if we get a child in here that looks like they're experiencing abuse at home, you need to know how to recognize that, because they don't have a voice sometimes, of anybody in their life to stick up for them. We had a family at another place that we were at, and the mom was not taking care of this kid at all. They were living in squalor. And one of the ladies in the church had to report it. And it was a big brouhaha, because when the state came in, they said, you can't have a kid living like this. And so they took the kid, which I'm sure the mom was irate, but you can't have the kid living in just the slums, basically. It was just terrible. They weren't feeding the kid. They weren't doing anything, And so sometimes this is something to protect the kid. All right, child sexual abuse. The employment, use, persuasion, inducement, enticement, coercion of any child to engage in or assist in any other person to engage in any sexually explicit conduct or visual depiction of such conduct. So sexual abuse is not just committing a sexual act with them, it's having them in the room while stuff's going on is considered abuse. Showing them things that they shouldn't be seeing at that young age, even if it's just pictures of stuff. All of that is stuff that is considered abuse. So it's not just raping a child or something like that that's abuse. There's other things that fall under that same category of exposing them to stuff that they should not be exposed to at a young age. This includes rape, or in cases of a caretaker or inter-family relationship, statutory rape, molestation, prostitution, or other forms of sexploitation for children. Verbal comments of a sexual nature, pornographic material, exhibitionism directed at children, and allowing children to witness sexual activity are all included. And those are state laws. That's not a Stillwater thing. That's a state law that if you do that kind of stuff, it's considered sexual abuse. All right, the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. So this is something that just insurance is required to put this in. So this is an actual federal law. It says the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. Based on the definitions above, the following acts are prohibited during any activity for children and youth. Any display or demonstration of sexual activity, abuse, insinuation of abuse, or evidence of abusive conduct toward a child or youth, sexual advances or sexual activity of any kind between any adult and a child or youth, infliction of physically abusive behavior or bodily injury to a child or youth, physical neglect of a child or youth, including failure to provide adequate supervision in relation to planned activities. Adequate supervision means the type of supervision a reasonable person would provide in the same or similar situation. Causing mental or emotional injury to a child or youth, possessing or accessing obscene or pornographic materials at any activity, possessing illegal drugs or being under the influence of any illegal drugs, consuming or being under the influence of alcohol, or participating in any activity designed for children or youth. So don't go out and get drunk and then come up here wanting to work with the kids. All right, signs of child abuse. So these are things, now obviously when you're talking about adults looking for signs of child abuse, there's a certain level of wisdom or discretion that has to be involved. You know, if you've ever had little kids, you know not every bruise that they have is abuse. You know, my kid on the way in had to pee real bad, and he came running out to tell somebody, and he ran into the doorknob. You know what I mean? My little one, you know, I got to pee, and he ran out. He ran so fast he ran into the doorknob. You know, and so there is a certain level of wisdom and discretion where you say, okay, am I seeing just an active 3-year-old boy who's been playing, or are we looking at signs of abuse? But this is just a general guideline. It says, children suffering from abuse will often not tell anyone. They frequently blame themselves for the abuse. The list below is not all-inclusive, but includes common indicators of abuse. In addition, any change in appearance or behavior should serve as a warning sign. Keep in mind that a sign itself may not indicate abuse, but could have a number of other causes. These signs should be a warning that further investigation may be necessary. Right? So we're not, unless it's something real bad, you know, we're just, these are just guidelines that maybe we want to do a little more looking into a certain situation or something like that we don't, you know, if a kid comes in with a bruise, we don't just assume and jump all over the parents. We kind of do a little bit of finding out what's going on. If you observe any of the following in a child, report it immediately to staff or leadership. So that's an important side of this, that in general, the volunteers are not who we're asking to fix these problems. It's better generally if a volunteer just lets a staff person know what they're seeing and then let the staff person handle it, instead of just having all of our volunteers trying to handle these kind of things. It's easier if the staff know and you can let them handle it, then we have a record of what was said and that kind of stuff. So injuries such as burns or bruises in a pattern, cuts, black eyes, or other serious injuries, aggressive, disruptive, or destructive behavior, fear of parents or other adults, frequent complaints or pain or lack of reaction to pain, passive, withdrawn, or emotionless behavior, signs of neglect, appears malnourished, stealing or begging for food, fatigue or listlessness, depression, lack of personal cleanliness. Clothes that are torn or dirty or inappropriate for the climate, medical conditions that are not treated, and then sexual abuse signs, knowledge about sexual relations beyond what's appropriate for the child's age, difficulty sitting or walking, sexually suggestive or promiscuous behavior, physical signs of a sexually transmitted disease, evidence of injury to their genital area, complaints of painful urination, or hostility towards adults, or fear of being alone with adults. So those are all some good things to keep in mind that hopefully you'll never encounter, but at least you're aware of them. So this next one is just a word for word off the state of Florida's website. This is their law in regard to working with kids. Chapter 39 of the Florida statutes mandates that any person who knows or has reasonable cause to suspect that a child is abused, neglected, or abandoned by a parent, legal custodian, or caregiver, or any person responsible for the child's welfare shall immediately report such knowledge or suspicion to the Florida Abuse Hotline of the Department of Children and Families. Right? So, that's the law, and that's how they expect it to be handled. I would think within our situation here, like I said, if there's some question about this, you can bring it to the staff. But yeah, in general, if it's clear that somebody's being abused, we have a legal obligation to report it and let them handle it. So they want you to report it, and then they're going to investigate it. It doesn't automatically mean that they're going to do something, but they are going to investigate it, and they're going to get to the bottom of whether this kid's being abused or not. Right? And so that's really what we're after with that. And then in 2012, House Bill 1355 was passed into law, It shall be referred to as the protection of vulnerable persons. The bill adds to the current reporting requirements of the above law by removing the limitation that only caregiver abuse be reported to the hotline by requiring any person to report known or reasonably suspected physical or emotional abuse of a child by any adult person. So they removed the part that says you have to be a caregiver responsible for this kid to be required to do it. And they're basically saying anyone, if you're in the state of Florida and you find out that a kid is being abused, whether you're their caregiver or not, you have a legal obligation to let somebody know. Right? The bill also requires any person to report known or reasonably suspected sexual abuse of a child by any person. The bill requires the Central Abuse Hotline to accept any call reporting child abuse, abandonment, or neglect by someone other than a caregiver, and to forward the concern to the appropriate sheriff's office for further investigation. The bill also states that the knowledge and willful failure of a person who is required to report known or suspected child abuse, abandonment, or neglect is elevated from a first-degree misdemeanor to a third-degree felony. Okay. Reporting policy. So these are some Stillwater guidelines. It's our policy to report any suspicion or incident of child abuse involving any child under our care. There are 3 common ways that someone may become aware of abuse. Either you observe the abuse, right? So you see it happening. You walk in on somebody and it's happening, right? Anyone who observes the abuse should attempt to stop the abuse if it's safe to do so, right? Sometimes it's not safe, you know. You walk in and somebody's got a weapon or something like that. You're not required by law to jump in and mix it up. You know, so if it's safe to remove the kid, that's the first option, is to immediately, if you can, get the kid out of that situation. It says remain calm, attempt to protect the child's privacy, and follow the reporting procedure listed below. It says if you suspect the abuse, you should just report it immediately following the procedure. So that's like if you got a pretty good idea something's not quite right with the kid, then you just need to let the staff know and let us handle it. Or a child could report abuse to you. Remain calm. In general, you want to believe the child. You want to start at least from that point of view of believing the child. We respect the child's privacy, so we don't let people know whenever we find these things out. It's got to stay pretty much confidential. And report the incident immediately as indicated below. So here's our reporting procedure. Step 1 is you're wanting to make sure that the child is safe from immediate harm. Don't leave the child alone to report the issue. Don't attempt to confront an alleged violator. Report the incident immediately to a staff member. That third one's probably the hardest one for some people. You know what I mean? Like if I walked in on something, but anyways, that's what the law says. It says don't attempt to confront them. Report the incident immediately to a staff member of Stillwater Church. Report abuse and neglect to local authorities as required by law. And then complete a report of suspected incident of child abuse and present it to us, basically, at the staff. So just to go over that just real quick, it's just basically saying don't leave the kid alone. If you can, when you figure that out, make a report about it. If it's a genuine thing where you got some real concerns of something that's going on, we make an immediate report that day and let somebody in the staff know so that we can follow up. Because if you don't let us know and then something happens, then we don't have that stuff on file that says, no, we knew about it, we tried to help, that kind of thing. If you just keep it to yourself, it doesn't really help much. And so we got to make sure that we follow the reporting procedures. And like I said, hopefully none of this ever happens. And then 7, a staff member or elder of Stillwater will contact the following, either the child's parents or legal guardian. We'll deal with if we have to have any legal counsel, our insurance agent, other authorities as required. So that's not stuff y'all need to deal with. That's just stuff that we have to have in our policy of how we're going to handle it on the back end. Confidentiality. All reports of child abuse will be held in absolute confidence. No communication by any person is allowed concerning the alleged event except as necessary to cooperate with an official investigation. In no case will the identity of the victim or the accused be disclosed except as required by law. Response plan if the accused is a staff member or volunteer. So it's handled slightly different if it's somebody that is just here at the church and a staff member or volunteer catches the abuse. But it could be that somebody slips through the cracks in our own group here of volunteers or staff. And if something like that were to ever happen, it says any person who is accused or suspected of abusing a child, whether a volunteer or employee, will be suspended automatically from any further participation in any of our activities that involve children. The suspension will continue until the results of any of our internal or law enforcement investigations and any resulting legal proceedings are concluded. So if it's a genuine complaint where there's some credibility to this, that maybe something might have been done with a worker, then they just have to step aside until we figure out what's going on, basically. Senior pastor and elders will determine, based on the results of the investigation, whether to return the person to the prior position if the allegations are found to be untrue, or take other action up to termination of an employee if found guilty. All right, so for you guys, this is one of the most important sections, the supervision requirements. In general, these are laws with the state of Florida. So this is, if it sounds like, oh, that doesn't seem like a good idea, it's probably not just a Stillwater idea. These are things that the insurance requires, and things that are generally common knowledge of how you're going to handle kids in the state of Florida. The following requirements are designed to safeguard the children under our care and to also avoid situations where children can be isolated in a one-on-one situation with staff and volunteers, and to ensure children are not monitored by underage volunteers. Right? So typically in churches where sometimes we don't have enough people to help, there is a tendency to want to get teens to help with supervising, and so there are certain laws about teens and younger people and their ability to be a supervisor over other young people. Right? Doesn't mean they can't help, but they can't be one of our two people. In every place where there's kids, there has to be at least two screened and approved adults. And as long as those two people are in place, there can be other volunteers that are helping. So like when we do VBS, we may have 4 or 5 people that are wanting to be in the room helping that maybe haven't gone through the background screens, but they can't be one of the 2 people that have a responsibility over those kids. So if we're doing VBS and we're working through a room and we got kids and we got a retired person comes in and says, hey, I just want to help hand out candy. They can do that without having gone through the screening process, as long as we have 2 people that have gone through the screening process that are keeping an eye on these kids, right? So that's kind of how it goes. Or you could have a teenager in there that's wanting to help, as long as they're not counting towards the 2 people that are required to be in there, right? So the 2 adult rule, at least 2 adults will be present for any activity involving kids. Teen volunteers under the age of 18 can assist, but only under the supervision of at least 2 adults. The director of children's ministries is responsible for ensuring proper supervision is on hand for all events involving children, right? So that's essentially, that's Deb. That's kind of her thing, is to make sure that we have the volunteers and the people that are over there. And then the staff tries to help her as possible. So we're trying to, make her job as easy as possible. But like on a Sunday morning, I'm not over there, so I don't see who's over there. So Deb's kind of like our go-between to try and make sure that in every spot where there's going to be kids over there, that we have adequate supervision. So no workers under the age of 18, no individual under the age of 18 will be allowed primary responsibility for supervising children. All right, so you can't have kids given a responsibility over kids, right? 5 years and older rule. Any screened or staff volunteer assigned primary responsibility for supervising children or youth must be at least 5 years older than the oldest child present that they're supervising. So in other words, if a kid just turns 18, you can't let them be, even if they're screened, they can't be the supervisor of the youth group with 17 and 16-year-olds. It's just too close in age, right? And so there has to be at least a 5-year age separation. So if you're 18 or 19, you can help in the youth, but you can't be one of the people that Corey leaves them with to watch over that. There's a 5-year rule that's required by insurance that they don't want 18-year-olds watching 17-year-olds. It's just there's too much peer pressure. There's too much potential there for it to not really be supervision, right? It says this is a question of authority. Having children supervise children is not a good idea. Having workers within 5 years of the age of the child they're asked to supervise may lead to control problems. A volunteer wishing to work with children must be an attender of Stillwater for at least 6 months. We don't want somebody that nobody knows coming in and being with the kids. I had, one time, might have been 15, 16 years ago now, when I was a youth pastor, and a guy came in the service when I was preaching. He sat down in the back. And so I went afterwards and I said, hey, how's it going? And he says, oh, well, God sent me here and he told me that I was supposed to be the co-leader of this group with you. I'd never seen this guy before, He didn't go to the church. He just walked in off the street and said God told him that he's supposed to take over and that me and him were going to do it together. And I said, well, how about this? How about you just attend the youth group for a few months? And so we can kind of get to know who you are. Because I can't turn the group over to somebody that I've never met. I never saw him again, And that's the type of stuff that happens that we try and protect against, is people just coming in with kind of wild, crazy ideas that maybe seem nice on the outside, but nobody's had, because sometimes it takes a few weeks to spot crazy, and so they need to be here for a little bit so you can kind of figure out, because it'll come out eventually if you just give them long enough. And so we want people that we feel like we know them enough, right? Observation of children. Activities involving children will be conducted in areas that are visible from other areas. If the activity is taking place indoors, this will involve keeping doors or windows open or using half doors or doors with windows. At no time will an adult meet with a child alone in any room or area where they cannot be seen. That's probably the single biggest rule that we have to make sure that we're following. All the rules are important, but just in day-to-day practical stuff, don't be in a room with a kid by yourself. That's the single most important one. 90% of our problems will be fixed if we don't do that, right? Counseling safeguards. Any room used for counseling children will be required to have the door open for the entire session, or a door with a vision panel with an unobstructed view. I don't know that we do a lot of that, but if you ever do, you can't just, even if it's something like, oh, I'm just counseling them, you still can't do that by yourself. You can't do that. Because that's what an abuser would say. Oh, well, they were having a hard day. They wanted me to talk to them. Well, you can't do that. First aid and CPR training. We will ensure that first aid and CPR training is made available for all staff members and volunteers on an annual basis. Only those individuals who have current training are allowed to use any emergency supplies or equipment. So what we're going to do on this first one, I'm not like some big CPR person or anything. We are going to show a video in a few minutes at the end of this, just so that you're exposed to some of the basics. I think it's a short one, like 5 minutes, just so you're exposed to some of the basics, because you never know. In an emergency, if some kid's choking, you want to be able to help them, So, we're not doing blood transfusions and open heart surgery over there, but if somebody's choking, you need to know at least the basics on how to help them. All right, in a situation where a trained staff member or volunteer has legitimate reason to be alone with a child, written parental permission slips will be required. So I don't know what that would be, but if it ever happened, you can't do that unless mom and dad know that you're with the kids. So I don't know what that would be. Like, say if somebody was taking somebody to a trip or something, I don't know. I can't think of anything, but that's in there just in case, that if there ever was something that came up where the two of them are going to a conference or something like that, mom and dad have to be aware and have signed some kind of permission slip. We will hold an annual orientation session. That's this one, for all paid staff and volunteers. Topics covered will include the following: a review of the policy regarding protection of children, definitions of child abuse and symptoms of child abuse, state laws regarding child abuse, supervisory requirements, appropriate steps to report an incident, and a record of everyone in attendance will be kept by Human Resources. So that's pretty much what we're doing right now. We're almost done. All right, screening of staff and volunteers. The proper selection of those individuals who work with children or youth is one of the most critical aspects of child protection program. It really is, because if you get the right people over there, most of the stuff takes care of itself, right? But when you're not doing a good job of screening and you let the pressure of having to have all these volunteers, which it's a lot of volunteers and there is a pressure, but if you let that pressure allow you to cut corners, then that's when we start really running into issues. So this is our number one wall of defense, is just getting the right people over there from the beginning. Right? All staff and volunteers who supervise children or youth will be required to submit a criminal background check. If you haven't done that and you want to work with the kids, Kay does all the background checks, so you just let her know. All staff or volunteers who supervise children will be required to submit an application that includes contact information. That's all done at the same time as the background check. Any information collected during this process will be held in the strictest confidence and will only be available to Human Resources, Senior Pastor, and the elders. So whatever shows up on these things, it's not, it's just got to stay in confidence. It will be Human Resources' responsibility to conduct staff and volunteer screening. No individuals with a sexual crime or crimes involving children will be allowed to supervise or participate in activities involving children. I had another incident that happened when, I had just started as the youth pastor of that church, less than 2 months. And some guy comes up to me and he says, what did he say? Oh, so, and sometimes you're waiting on the parents to come pick up the kids, right? And so this girl's mom was running late. And so me and some of the leaders were just hanging out there in the sanctuary waiting for this girl's mom to come pick her up. And so this guy is in there. He looks shady to me. Some people you can't tell, and then some people look shady. He even looks shady. He says, well, you know what? I'll take her home for you. I don't want you guys to have to wait. So I live over on that side of town. I'll take her home. I say, excuse me, you are not taking this little girl home by yourself. And so at the next staff meeting, I brought that up. And the kids' church pastor said, he did not. He has a warrant, not a warrant, a thing from the court that he's not allowed to even be around kids. He shouldn't have even been in your youth service because he'd already had a crime against a kid before. But because I was the new youth pastor, he thought he'd just test and see. And so he was coming in there being part of the services. And he had crimes against kids and was not supposed to be, as part of his court requirement, wasn't supposed to be anywhere near kids anymore. And yet there he is wanting to take this little girl home. And so, if somebody has a sexual crime, then they need to stay away from the kids, period. You know what I mean? Because often that lust or whatever that sin is often persists. Sometimes it doesn't, but we're not gambling with these kids. And so if that's your thing, you got to stay away from the kids, if you had something like that. Just like if somebody was a former alcoholic, I'm not having you do the bar ministry. You know what I mean? There's just certain things, there's just wisdom says, okay, if you've fallen in that area in the past, right? The guy who's been divorced 7 times does not need to head up the single ladies ministry. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just too much of a potential thing. And so if somebody has sexual crimes against kids, just you come to church, but just stay away from the kids. Jesus loves you, he forgives you, but we're also going to use some wisdom. Got to stay away from these kids. We've got to keep these kids safe. Exception policy. There may be some exceptions made for events that happened a long time ago. Any exceptions must be approved by unanimous vote of the senior pastor and elders, and a written explanation of the reasoning for the exception must be kept on file. So that's not dealing with sexual crimes. That's dealing with, if somebody had a DUI 20 years ago or something, and we're saying, okay, that didn't have anything to do with kids. We're going to let you continue to serve, or you didn't pay your taxes 1 year, whatever it is. Not everything that shows up on somebody's background check has anything to do with this kind of stuff, or maybe it was a long time ago. So if it's not something that's an automatic denial, like a sexual crime, then the elders have to talk about it and say, what do we think? All right, that's it. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to show a quick CPR video, and then when that's done, I'm going to ask everybody to come up and just before you leave, check these boxes. This is what we went over today in the meeting, and just sign and date it, print your name, so that we have this on file, so that whenever we go to renew our insurance, if they want to see it, we can say, no, we are doing our absolute best to train people here at the church, and so we don't have any issues. We want to keep these on file. All right.